Hello, bonsoir. Thank you for coming here. It's such a lovely thing to have such an intimate group of people joining me tonight. So my name is Emma Jones. It's my third day here at the Jan Michalski Foundation, so I'm still very much settling in and getting used to seeing the Alps from my window in the morning. I just wanted to start with a couple of thank yous. So thanks to Thomas and Chantal, and also to Eric for organising this talk, and also to everyone that I've met so far for making me feel so welcome here. I also wanted to thank the Jan Michalski Foundation more generally for the opportunity to be in residence here for the month. And as I said, it's really lovely to be here with you all tonight. And perhaps because we're a smaller group, I hope that that means that people will feel comfortable kind of having a conversation or asking questions at the end of the talk, because it won't run for the whole hour. But of course, if not, I think there are drinks afterwards. So please do stay for that. And yeah, I hope that we can have a chat. I'm sorry for not speaking in French. I'll try to speak slowly and clearly, and please do wave if you need me to slow down at all. Just to give some brief background to my work, I'm an essayist, which basically means that I write across different types of non-fiction. I'm mainly an art critic and culture writer, and that encompasses everything from reviewing photo books and exhibitions to writing about Get Ready With Me videos on YouTube. I'm also an adventure cyclist, and I spent last summer living on my bike for a few months. And writing about being outside is a really big part of my work too. One piece that I really enjoyed writing is now published on a cycling website called The Radivist, and that's all about cycling long distances as a form of Zen meditation. Really, I'm very fortunate in that I get to write about what I love, and I tend to follow stories or scenes that I can't get out of my head. I'm at the Jan Michalski Foundation to continue to develop my first essay collection, which is provisionally titled Becoming Landscapes. This collection attempts to bring all these different modes of non-fiction writing that I've been working on, place writing, art writing, and some memoir together. It will look at how British artists and artists based in the UK have visualised their relationship to specific places. While there has been much written on how art is responding to the current Anthropocene, I believe it's important to go a step further and think about how art can connect or reconnect us to our immediate landscapes. Throughout this collection, I'll be examining how joy in forged connections can be a better approach to the climate emergency than fatalism. I'm exploring visual responses to landscapes that are personal and emotional rather than only representational, and how this, in turn, has impacted my own relationship to various landscapes too. I want readers to rethink their relationships to their own local or national landscapes to inspire stewardship and a sense of ownership. Climate depression, or perhaps what's called also climate anxiety, has made it really difficult for many people, myself included, to speak or write about landscape, because sometimes the grief of the climate crisis feels incredibly heavy and weighty. I came to many of the artists that I'm writing about in a state of grief, and I found in their work a way to reconnect to and reposition myself within the landscape as a part of it, rather than as an outsider mourning its loss. Becoming Landscapes is also an attempt to highlight how ideas of landscape are and have been constructed. I'm writing as someone British who lives in the UK, and as someone who has noticed a swing to the right there politically that is bolstered by a fixed sense of national identity tied to the English pastoral. Writers, politicians, and others have argued for a need to return to something that has been, and I use quotation marks, lost. Terms such as deep England or mention of a green and pleasant land can creep into this narrative as dog whistles for a very narrow understanding of what England, or more widely the UK, is, and who our national landscapes are for. In reality, the landscape, and certainly artists working within the landscape genre, have created a body of work that shows how Britain is a land formed by centuries of human activity. This is to say, then, that an art history tracing the British landscape is not neutral. It's been influenced by the landowners who commissioned people to paint for them, by access and enclosure laws, and the fear of mechanisation and industrialisation. And anyone who has seen John Berger's influential TV series or read his book, Ways of Seeing, might remember this painting by Thomas Gainsborough, and Berger links this work to really interesting ideas of sort of private land and land ownership, and I think this is in the collection of the National Gallery. Landscape is, in the words of John Piper, the painter John Piper, a palimpsest, a document that has been written over and erased again and again. I want to think about how contemporary artists are reckoning with that history and writing their own. As becoming landscapes combines different elements, so too does it begin at different points. I want to begin with what I've been thinking about as I've approached this longer piece of work. I'll do a short reading from one of the essays, which is titled Leaky Boundaries, and I'll then move on to discuss the essay that I am developing here, which is about the representation of standing stones and natural stone formations through the works of several contemporary artists. I think the whole talk will probably take around 40 minutes, and it's quite kaleidoscopic and roaming, so that's kind of like my writing style too. So the way that I write about landscape is influenced by how I interact. Landscapes is influenced by how I interact with them as a body moving through the world. There are a couple of writers and artists who beautifully get to the heart of this idea and whose thinking has influenced my own approach to the book. One of them is the Romantic poet John Clare. His poems and his precise and personal use of language have always resonated. There's a part within his most famous poem, The Nightingale's Nest, where he gets down to the level of the nest on the ground. And this is a quote from that poem, and I'll read it too. And so Clare writes, "There have I hunted like a very boy, creeping on hands and knees through matted thorns, to find her nest and see her feed her young. And vainly did I many hours employ, all seemed as hidden as a thought unborn, and where these creeping fern leaves ramp among the hazel's underboughs, I've nestled down and watched her while she sung." To me, these lines are really incredibly evocative. I can imagine Clare as a child scratching his knees on the thorns or running his fingers over those crimped or ridged fern leaves. The idea of getting into the landscape in a way that positions the body at its level somehow is a big part of my work. It's about getting to know the landscape through the senses. There are particular moments where, either quite suddenly or over a longer period, I feel like landscape and body merge. In some ways, I'm thinking about how these quite romantic ideas about landscape and mind are applied today at a time of climate crisis, but also with an awareness of access and who feels welcome in particular spaces. And this is something that Clare, born into an agricultural labouring family on the fringes of the Romantic canon until the 20th century, felt acutely. In visual art, this idea of body and landscape merging somehow, within a British context at least, was first introduced to me by the work of Ithell Colquhoun, who's now one of my favourite artists, and this is Colquhoun's work, Scylla. In the painting, Colquhoun reimagines her own body as it appears to her looking down at her legs in a bathtub. Her peaking knees and thick thighs become fleshy cliffs. Under the water, where the two cliffs meet, wet and heavy pubic hair is instead blooming seaweed, feathering outwards. On one rock thigh, a small collection of white shells is suckered to the skin. Scylla is likely titled after the monster who, in Greek mythology, lured sailors to their watery death in the narrow passage between two cliffs. And just nosing into the central space of the painting, is the pointed bow of a white boat. Despite the still water, the suggestion is that it'll be crushed or thrown against these quite phallic rocks. Colquhoun supposes herself as both body and landscape, both in the bath and outside of it. For her, the bath is a space to connect the body to something larger that sits outside of itself. I don't know where Colquhoun's bathtub was, but at the time I was thinking about her, I was also lying in a bath, its water tepid, puckering the skin. And it was in the Lake District, just outside of Grasmere, and through the windows the hills were visible, and from the bath I could only grasp at the texture of them, the fissures caused by the grey rock pushing through the earth. Earlier I'd walked through those hills to Easdale Tarn, a lake in a glacial valley. At the basin I found the water clear, but reflecting the burnt brown of the rocks beneath. It is not quite true to say that I was lying down in the bath like Colquhoun was. I was not sitting up with raised knees, but curled roundly like a stone, and most of my body was submerged, but there were small islands of skin where there was a quiet lapping. A circular patch of my left thigh uncovered, the tips of my hair stuck to my collarbone, and I sank deeper and was reminded of the stones on the shore of the tarn that the water reached but did not swallow whole. There's a really beautiful quote by the painter Graham Sutherland that I'm going to share now, which is on the slide, but I'll read it too, and he says, "I felt just as much part of the earth as my features were part of me. I did not feel that my imagination was in conflict with the real, but that reality was a dispersed and disintegrated form of my imagination. It became my habit to walk through and soak myself in the country. I never forced myself here or consciously looked for subjects." My own personal experiences, similar to Graham's, those times where I have soaked myself in the landscape, inform this collection as a whole, even if these experiences don't always make it into the essays explicitly. So alongside this thinking and approach to being in the landscape and being in landscapes, I'm also really interested in the essay as a specific as a specific type of writing. And I find that when I'm researching, things don't follow in a linear way. Rather, they spread outwards, making connections. And the best way that I can describe it is like a mesh. And I'm really drawn to the philosopher and ecologist Timothy Morton when I'm thinking about this. So Morton uses this idea of the mesh in his book, The Ecological Thought, as a metaphor for, and I quote, even though it's not on the screen, the vast interconnectedness of all living and non-living beings. And when I read that about the interconnectedness from Timothy Morton, I was really reminded of this quote from an essay by the American poet and physician William Carlos Williams from his 1925 work, An Essay on Virginia, where he says, "Ability in an essay is multiplicity, infinite fracture, the intercrossing of opposed forces, establishing any number of opposed centers of stillness." The mesh of Morton's ecosystem is applicable to Williams's thinking around the essay as a space that can hold or suspend multiplicity through its form. And while I am here, I am also wanting to think about a bit deeper about what this looks like in my work. How can I hold the work of an artist, a landscape, and my own personal experiences in suspension without any one having authority over the other? So, in Becoming Landscapes, I found that I am not focusing on a grouping of artists who are necessarily looking at the same sites, rather that the ideas that they are exploring through their works link them to me and my experiences somehow, as well as to each other. Just gonna have a sip of water. So, one of the first places that I wanted to write about, where I really felt this idea of becoming a landscape, was at Clevedon Marine Lake, and also through the work of Chinese-British artist Yan Preston. At first glance, the spaces that we were drawn to are quite different. One is a tidal pool in the southwest of England, and the other a rhododendron bush on the outskirts of Burnley in the northwest of England. However, Preston's work and my relation to the tidal pool consider the same questions. What makes us want to return to certain places over and over again? Why are we drawn to them, especially in times of crisis? What does it mean to go back to landscapes that have been created due to human intervention? What is our obsession with containment, and what does it mean to fail to contain? So this is a still from Clevedon Marine Lake, and it's from a live feed video, so a video that is set up and filming constantly, and you can access this on later on YouTube if you'd like to. I'd thoroughly recommend it. It's like slow television at its absolute peak. I touch on this a little bit in the essay, but you might be able to see a vague line of concrete, which is the wall the water flows over when the channel that feeds it reaches high tide. It's sort of a cross between a natural and man-made infinity pool, and when you're in the water and look out towards the estuary or the channel, you don't see the beach beneath the pool at all. So it feels like you're part of this much larger body of water. I wasn't able to visit the tidal pool for a while, instead choosing to view it from a distance through the live stream, but when I eventually did visit, it felt as if it was the culmination of what I was trying, but at the time struggling to say. And after that, I started visiting a lot. I was living in a place called Bristol, which is about an hour from Clevedon, and I was going through quite a difficult time personally, and this tidal pool became a sort of safe space. It's taken me quite a long time to figure out why that was, why I became so heavily invested in this space that's always changing, that blurs the boundary between places. And that's another thing that I am sort of exploring in this essay too. I'd make recordings a lot and holding my cracked phone precariously close to the water, and there was the gentle lick of it against the concrete, or the sound of a small wave folding back in on itself. And it still felt as if it was a type of speaking back, the promise of a return to a type of speech, a way of working through. Later, and the last time I ever recorded it was on a hot sunny day, and there was the sound of water overwhelmed by music from mobile phones, overlapping conversations, a squeaky pump being used to blow up an inflatable kayak. So the first reading is about this space of the tidal pool as experienced through the screen on my laptop and also through research. Okay. Too anxious to drift much further than the local shops, I lay supine on the sofa and opened my laptop. On Google Maps, I ran my cursor along the River Avon until it met the Severn Estuary, so named after its largest tributary. The longest river in the United Kingdom may become the estuary's epithet, but there are others, around 600 in total, that drain into this one channel, merging to form a single steady swell toward the sea. At its broadest point, the estuary sits at 2 miles wide. I zoomed out and saw the water as a huge cleft, separating England from Wales. I imagined the future trips that I would take, the places along the estuary that I could immerse myself in. Through my screen, I swam in the refurbished Lido at Portishead, took boat trips to the abandoned islands of Steep and Flatholm, and, most compulsively, I returned again and again to Clevedon Marine Lake. The charity responsible for this tidal pool and its upkeep have set up a live stream of it. The video camera is positioned with a downward view of the pool from the edge of a mini golf course. I spent hours watching that constant film. The longer I looked, the more I was drawn in. I'd track backwards and forwards through the day, from darkness to light, dawn joggers and dog walkers on the slanted concrete promenade, the heads of the early morning swimmers barely visible, their movements darkening the water around them, a shadow rippling outward from an arrow point in 2 long diagonal lines. Clevedon Tidal Pool is fed by the Bristol Channel, the end point of the Severn the end point of the Severn Estuary as it meets the start of the North Atlantic. There are many beautiful words that describe the movement of water. Here it flows over the sea walls during fortnightly overtoppings as the channel rises to a high tide above 12 meters. I tried to pinpoint these tides through my screen, but could never seem to quite catch them. Their movements were too elusive. The estuary spilt over the wall of the lake until its boundary disappeared altogether. The pool contains these otherwise dangerous currents in a space in which it is safe enough to swim, but the tide carries with it more than just water. The silt and shell debris that builds up on the floor until the whole pool is shallower and soft underfoot. I heard stories about eels taken in with the currents. Those that don't make it out with the tidal shift might stay there for months until the twice-yearly drainage and cleaning operation. On darker days, I imagined them there, one long body and so unable to climb back over the walls, covered in silt and mud, buried deep and writhing, unearthed, thrown back, the things we build to hold, whether incidental or not. So, for the second reading from this essay, I wanted to bring in Jan Wang Preston's work, which considers the same need to return to a single place multiple times. I haven't got great high-res photos, so sorry, Jan, if you're watching this. I haven't got great high-res photos, but I hope that you can still get a sense of her work through the screen. So yeah, this is the second reading from Leaky Boundaries. I am not the only one to feel the stubborn pull towards a particular place. As if, in repetition, it is possible to make sense not just of the landscape, but ourselves too. The act of returning and of looking allows a type of becoming that rethinks borders, the borders of the body and its influence on landscape, the futility of attempting to contain, what it feels like to have porous boundaries, what happens when things overflow. The desire of water to morph, shape-shift, and facilitate the new persistently overflows any attempt at capture, writes Estrida Nemanis in her essay Hydrofeminism, or On Becoming a Body of Water. Nemanis argues that learning to find a home within what she calls the quivering tension of the in-between offers the opportunity for a feminist reimagining of different types of body. Political bodies, physical bodies, ecological bodies. It's an idea that can be applied beyond the watery, arguing for a means to reposition our relationship with the natural world. Foregoing a hierarchical system of classification to embrace a landscape that refuses to be fully fixed, takes in the entirety of an ecosystem, and suggests that it is still possible to find space when our place in the world slips. On the 17th of March 2020, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Jan Wang Preston walked around Schedenklau, a small patch of moorland close to her home on the cusp of the South Pennines. It marked the start of a year-long project. There were times when the steep drive there was difficult, heavy rain battering the windscreen, a fine and slippery layer of snow on the road. There were times when Preston didn't want to leave the house. The walk, a ritual, was undertaken just before sunset. Preston would pause at the same spot each time and set up her camera. The rhododendron plant that Preston photographed 182 times has insinuated itself into the small bowl of a hillside. Dipping at its center and extending its twisting branches in both directions, it forms the rough shape of a heart. There are tufty-looking grasses around its base, while the top boughs reach the ridgeline and touch the sky. Looking over the photographs, there are months where it seems like the plant is hardly changing. The same mass of green leathery leaves fills the frame. Variation instead comes in the form of the coolness or warmth of the light, the clouds in the sky, or, looking closely, the slight blur in the leaves that suggests that they were being moved by the wind when the shutter clicked. Just like watching the video of the tidal pool It is impossible to determine the exact moment buds start to flower, a burst of lilac blooming across the plant surface like a virus. Both my tidal pool and Preston's rhododendron are places made through human intervention, tracing their introductions to the British landscape to the Victorian era. Originally uprooted from southern Europe and Eastern Asia, the rhododendron became more than just an ornamental addition to landscaped gardens and as cover for game birds. As an extension of colonial material culture, it was a way to bring British imperialism into the home. There was an attempt to naturalize these plants, to make them safe in the domestic space. Since then, the rhododendron has been classified by the Wildlife and Countryside Act as an invasive non-native species. It proved impossible to contain, broke out of the glass houses and gaming estates, and laughed at the idea that it could be considered anything but wild. So that's 2 readings from Leaky Boundaries, which I'm hoping to finish while I'm here. But just to end, or the last section of this talk, I'd like to speak about the piece that I'm developing here. And this essay, which is provisionally titled Gathering, is about how artists use and represent different stony sites in their work. And I use the term stony sites to mean both natural geological stone formations, but also standing stones. Those Neolithic, prehistoric monuments which were placed by people for reasons that aren't fully, and perhaps never will be fully, understood. And this essay is quite different from the Leaky Boundaries essay. So here I'll be writing about several different artists in one piece and bringing less of myself into the essay as well. That said, there are definitely stony sites that inhabit my own consciousness, and I'm sure there are for you guys too. My overriding memory isn't so much of large stone formations climbed and conquered, but the dens that I'd make with my brothers, and we'd drag these huge logs across the ground, and we'd be too small to lift them above our heads. So the base of each branch would remain on the floor, leaving these lines of scratched earth behind us, all arriving at their chosen center. And that central tree would now grow new branches close to the ground and look like it was propping itself up. My brothers would lose interest when our work was done, leaving our homestead to throw pine cones at the trees or at each other. And I would always remain behind and pull out from my pockets the stones I'd collected from the forest floor and leave them at the imagined hearth of our little shelter. It was an offering of sorts to the creatures I assumed would arrive once we were heading back home in the van, with our heads lolling against each other's shoulders. In my imagination, these creatures would find the stones I had collected and would know that we had been there, a memory held not in the shelter itself, but the things I had chosen to pick up, that I had precisely arranged and balanced whilst crouched inside the den. It seems fitting, being here in the Swiss Jura, to be thinking about geological formations and man-made stony sites, to be thinking about histories that are a lot longer than the markings of leisure that have been introduced to the landscape through gardening and swimming spots, places that perhaps feel initially more secure than my tidal pool or Preston's rhododendron. And yet, the visual representation of Neolithic standing stones and the interpretation of natural stone formations reveals that these sites are not as firmly grounded as they may first appear. These are sites which, despite being thousands of years old, speak to contemporary issues. And this is a book by Joanne Parker, and she writes, in certain periods, naturally, there was more widespread interest in prehistoric remains than in others, as different generations saw their own anxieties reflected to different extents in the mysterious lives of the prehistoric builders. And so I just wanted to share 2 examples of protesters using the site of Stonehenge to raise environmental concerns. And Stonehenge is perhaps the most famous stone circle in England. And a few weeks ago, and this was really a really divisive act that was covered in the UK news really extensively. Stonehenge was the site of a Just Stop Oil protest, and then on the right you can see that it was painted in the 1960s by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. So these really old stones, it seems, continue to be animated today. The essay that I'm developing is about these stony sites as they are represented in visual art across the work of 3 contemporary artists, Tanua Sasraku, Derek Jarman, and Jasleen Kaur. Each of these artists brings stones into their work in some way, and I think what links them all and what I am interested in is how they use them to consider multiple existences through single objects, considering ideas of energies, safety, and notions of home. While my thinking is very much in the early stages, a part of my fascination with their work is about how it speaks to how we connect to history, both human and ecological, and how these artists are visualizing that connection through stones, geological time, and Neolithic structures. And we return again to this idea of multiplicity, how we become the multiple landscapes that we inhabit, rather than a single static site. So I wanted to start with Tanua Sasraku's Terratype series, and I think it's worth just speaking briefly here about how these are made, because it's quite a long and complex process. So the way that Sasraku makes these is deeply connected to the landscape, and through her use of handmade pigments is also connected to a long history of crafting in the UK. The works begin with plain newsprint paper, and Sasraku decides on a geometric form marked out at the beginning of the making process, and it's this that really decides the rough shape the work will take. Each terratype is made from layers of individual drawings, usually around 20 in total, and each piece of paper or layer is stained with foraged earth pigments. So that's a process that extracts color pigment from clay, ground soil, rocks, and plants. There's a real focus here on landscapes that are personal to Sasraku in some way. So earth pigments from the Isle of Skye in Scotland, where she travelled with her Scottish girlfriend Kirsty Black, and also Dartmoor in the southwest of England, close to where she grew up in Plymouth. The stained sheets are then stacked and a machine stitch is run around the perimeter to bind them into a single work. And then this bound piece is submerged in river, sea, or bog, usually for around 30 minutes, and she actually physically holds it down in the water for that time in order for the water to permeate fully. And then finally this bound piece is taken to the studio and torn, and you can see here that how it's been torn into, so revealing layers underneath. And while all of the other stages are quite precise and intentional, the tearing is meant to be more of an emotional process where gesture is coming in. And Sasraku makes a link here to action painting and speaks of sort of letting go of control. The terratypes are connected to these much larger monolithic sculptural works titled liths, which are enlarged printed scans of the shards of paper that have been torn away during the process of making the terratypes. So these are prints taken from the cut-offs of the terratypes, the pieces of paper that would otherwise have been thrown away are scanned and made sculptural, and in a way they are venerated. They are also visually, and in the way that they occupy space, similar to standing stones. Sasraku describes wanting to replicate a sensation from the Isle of Skye, a sense of spirituality, a higher than human experience. On her research and pigment foraging trips, she was drawn to different energies within the landscape. Those that are man-made, such as electricity pylons, but also the natural stone formations and their association with mythologies and folklore, and their enduring appeal today as a different type of gathering place for hiking groups and climbers. And the liths then, to me, seem like this type of meeting between these modern technologies and ancient energies. The liths can also be seen as existing within different and multiple temporalities. And there's this beautiful quote from Kirsty Black in Sasraku's recent monograph where she describes Storr, which is a mountain on the Isle of Skye. And this is a quote: "Coming to see Storr as a Shean moor or great fairy knoll deepened our understanding of the rock as a portal to other worlds through time and to untold dark mystery." It's that idea of a portal that I'm really taken with within Sasraku's work, how it becomes a way to engage with landscapes that have an emotional charge, and in reference to her upbringing in Plymouth, a way to exercise bad memories through the creation of new records. Sasraku is engaging with the landscape on its own terms, becoming a part of it through material processes that are time-consuming and laborious, that slows everything down and connects her work to a longer ecological history. So the next artist I want to mention is Derek Jarman. And in the early 1970s, Jarman took a trip to Avebury, which along with Stonehenge is one of the most famous standing stone sites in the UK. Just to give some really minimal context, it's a protected World Heritage Site in the southeast of England, and the stone circles are a part of this much larger historical ceremonial area. So it's a place that's really been, had a special place for people for a really, really long time. So shot on Super 8mm and through a yellow filter, Derek Jarman created a short 10-minute silent film titled A Journey to Avebury in response to his trip. Quick cuts mean that the journey doesn't develop in linear time, but instead jumps from site to site. It is fragmented and dreamlike, embodies the wandering eye of the flaneur. It is a memory rather than a reality. Sunlight at the top of a narrow path, an otherwise empty field with a huge bulbous collection of trees at its centre, interrupting the flat plains of field and sky. Soft grasses against a chain link fence, and silhouetted against the sky, the frame rate turns the birds into swooping dots across the screen. Stones start appearing about 2 minutes into the film. And to me, the stones are framed as if Jarman is taking their portrait. And there's a link here to Sasraku's Lith series. And I read in a review that Sasraku thinks of the liths as portraits too, which I found quite interesting. And in Jarman's work, they are regal, upright, and static, or else when they're shot in small groupings, they seem to be in some type of whispering collusion. It's telling, I think, that there's a cut shot from a group of stones to a group of children sitting on a wall, that there's a link being made between the history of these Neolithic stones and human history. The film is strange and otherworldly, but this is still a landscape that is populated by people. Jarman also shoots tracks, fences, direction posts, sheep and cows, thin figures moving across the skyline. The stones are a part of this built environment too. It's human physical reality mixed with otherworld energy. It's a meditative home movie. Jarman must have felt some affiliation with the stones at Avebury. They return within his work in a series of scaled-back architectural paintings, but I'm most interested in how they became a part of his highly celebrated garden on the British coast at Dungeness, where he moved in 1986. Stones become part of a living, growing landscape, and I'm thinking of them here as collected and gathered from one landscape, Avebury, and recreated at a different scale, made domestic. He writes in his diary, later published as his celebrated book, Modern Nature, of going out and collecting stones from the beach, on his own, with visitors, or else they are brought to him as offerings, along with shells and stakes, by the children from next door. He places them carefully in circles, calls them his standing stones. And Jarman moved to Dungeness after he was diagnosed with HIV, and the garden that he created became a solace. And I think that the stones are a part of that too, that there's something talismanic about them. When thinking about gathering stones as an act of care, I also wanted to touch on this work by Glaswegian artist Jocelyn Kaur. And these 3 small sculptures form a series titled Cairns. The word cairn has different meanings, and most commonly it's used now to describe the collections of stones placed by people at the summits of hills. But historically, it was also used as a descriptor for the stones used to mark burial places. In Kaur's work, they are a different type of signifier, a reference to the landscapes of Scotland that is also blended with personal memory and social history. These little collections of stones gathered by Kaur are made from found rubble, bricks, and artificial rocks that are then lit from beneath. When encountering this work within a gallery space the first time, I bent down really close to it, and it's a really quiet work and it feels quite devotional. Kaur says that she's really interested in, and this is a quote, the detritus from everyday life. I love playing with these seemingly valueless materials because they hold such strong narratives. The Cairns series is a direct reference to a story relating to Kaur's father. During her childhood, a Sikh saint advised him to light a ghee candle for 30 nights near their house to ward off negative energy, and her father protected the candle with a shelter of collected stones. And I really love that idea of stones as a type of shelter, as a way to hold something delicate. With each of these artists, the act of gathering the landscape is a way to bring it closer. It's about how we carry places with us, both physically and in our memories. The cairns Kaur makes are infused with protective energy, a way to make something safe. But it is also, as in Sasraku's work, a type of portal that holds or collides different histories within a single object. And they are also a reminder that cairns are not just created on the tops of hills. Like Jarman's stone circles, Kaur's stones are brought into the home, though they still retain something ceremonial perhaps, and they are still built by multiple people. Each of these artists examine what it is that we take from the landscape, physically and psychologically, and also what it is that we offer in return. And that's my talk. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions, or shall we have a drink together and chat upstairs? That's okay, we can talk in them over a drink.
I'm not sure this is a question, but possibly.
Yeah, that's fine. Very open to comments too.
Thank you. That was wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to talk more later about it. I was really intrigued by, because it kind of touches on what I'm also working on.
Oh, great.
The way you talked about how focusing on specifically English landscapes and sense of place inevitably touches on political problems and has a certain kind of political valence today. And I wondered, I hadn't encountered that Derek Jarman film before, and I wondered whether you thought it's changed in a way over time.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's very early in his practice, so, and I'm interested in how, because I think there's something definitely there in how it relates to the garden, which is something that comes much later in his life. So I really want to go through his diaries and read Modern Nature and see if there's anything in there that, because I don't think I'm not sure he explicitly looks back at the time at Avebury within that. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought about that, do you mean whether it can be read more politically now as well, the film?
Yeah, whether it inevitably would be read more politically now if a fresh viewer comes to it now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think he was very akin with nature because he called his cottage Prospect Cottage for a certain reason, because there was a prospect about he knew he was dying.
Yep.
But these stones, in fact, can be part of nature. As in Judaism, you leave a stone on a cemetery when you visit it to say, I was here, I have visited you. And those stones that he has, which resembles a bit of Avery, next to the nuclear power station, is a remark to say that nature can defeat what man creates. And I suppose this political thinking, or this thinking, existed even for Byron and Shelley, who came to Switzerland in 1806 to 1812, when they saw the mountains, Prometheus unbound. And their ideas of the mountains, they were here before us, and they will be here after us.
Yeah.
But I was here. Yeah. Me personally, I was here. Just as we see the tides come in every day. We live near to the estuary.
Yeah.
You see 2 times a day, if it doesn't happen at night or early in the morning, the tide going out and the tide coming in. And it will always be like that. And it's, I don't know, the individual's link with nature. We can destroy it, but we can't change it.
I think there's something really beautiful in there about what you said as well, because I think he speaks about the stones that he puts in his garden, that they're covered by flowers during some periods, and then the flowers come back and the stones are revealed again. So yeah, that's really...
And there's also this other writer who you must do wild swimming, notes from Walnut Farm.
Oh.
Did you ever read that?
No, I'll write it down. It's good. No.
Wild swimmer.
No.
15 years ago.
Okay.
And he's got 5 volumes.
Brilliant.
And he does wild swimming throughout England.
Oh, great. I must read it.
And his first book was Notes from Walnut Farm. I'll try and remember his name, but I have all his books.
I'm going to write it down.
Absolutely. And when you were saying you were swimming in the Tarn, because they're meres, they're not lakes, they're meres, because Windermere is called a mere. They're all lakes. Cumbria is all meres, not lakes. And it's something which is man's or a person's relation with nature. And you talk about the rhododendron. In botany, really, it was George Forester who went to China, one of these dukes, which is a National Trust place now, and he brought back the rhododendrons, 261, I think. And the first one is the one which is the most prolific.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to tame now. But it just shows how something from another environment can adapt to any environment. We can all adapt. We're all adapt.
Yeah.
And something politically about migration, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that Jan Wang Preston really is thinking about as a sort of Chinese-British artist, as well as ideas of migration. And I also think there's something really interesting there that she's making. So initially her work was shared on Instagram, and then it became a much larger project. But she started on Instagram and she termed it Invasive Species. That's what she called the series. And she's kind of tracking the pandemic through this.
Shame was something which was, we don't really understand why there was Avery or the...
no.
But it was the shamanism in a way, that it was something religious for them. That they had to see. It was a burial site also, apparently. The first cremations. And the man who was first, they found the bones of the person who was cremated at Stonehenge came from Sion, in Switzerland.
Oh, really?
It shows how people migrated
moving.
to England for some, but why he came to Stonehenge, and Avery was under earth until the Victorian period, when a man stumbled over a stone, and then they started digging it up. Found this ring of stones.
And I was also reading that there was a time when people destroyed them as well. Like there was a big kind of moment, you're nodding, yeah, where there was a big moment where they were kind of smashed or destructed or burnt. There was like a burning that went on too. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, I love stuff that the meaning of them kind of changes and is in flux. Like they're the things that I'm really excited about researching, and I think that Standing Stones is such a huge part of that. And we think of them as like, oh yeah, they're really solid and in the earth, but actually, just like all landscapes, they've also been rewritten over and over again and had different meanings ascribed to them depending on our moment.
And John Clare, he was locked away in a lunatic asylum because they all thought he was mad.
Yeah.
But in fact, he was a poet.
Yeah.
Looked after by this woman who looked after him, and they all thought he was bonkers.
Yeah. John Clare is such a...
And he was so close to it.
Yeah, so close to it. Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, or should we go have a drink? Great. No, thank you all so much for your time and for being here tonight. Thank you. Great.